Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are taking on what is probably one of the most critical geopolitical documents we've seen in a very long time.
Absolutely. We're going to break down Ukraine's comprehensive 20-point peace framework, which was officially unveiled on December 24th, 2025.
And we really want to make it clear for you, the learner, that this is more than just a document. Our sources, and we have a lot of them, frame this in some really powerful ways.
They do. They call it a blueprint for survival, which is just incredibly stark.
It is. They also call it a high-stakes chess match. And my favorite, a nation's tightrope act.
That tightrope analogy is just perfect because that's exactly what this is. It's this incredibly delicate balance between diplomacy and, well, raw deterrence.
And this plan has a history. It was meticulously crafted, we're told, by President Zelensky's administration.
And in very close coordination with the U.S. government.
Right. And it's an evolution. This isn't the first draft that hit the table.
No, not at all. It came from an earlier, more ambitious 28-point draft that apparently caused some friction.
So our mission today is to really unpack this entire 20-step strategy. We need to get into the mechanics of it.
We do. We have to understand how Ukraine is trying to assert its non-negotiable sovereignty.
Well, at the same time, swallowing some really difficult pills.
Exactly. Concessions like demilitarized zones, these conditional security guarantees. It's a minefield of details.
And we have to get into the politics behind the scenes, right? The sources are pretty clear that European allies were worried.
Oh, very worried.
Yeah.
They felt that the initial U.S.-backed draft might have, and I'm quoting here, favored Moscow excessively.
Which is what led to this final, more refined 20-point version we're looking at today.
It's the product of intense negotiation, not just with Russia, but within the Western alliance itself.
Okay, so let's get into it. Let's unpack this blueprint for a post-war future, look at what these 20 points actually promise, and explore this idea of transitioning a nation from, the rubble of war to the scaffolding of rebirth.
A great way to put it.
We'll start with the strategic context, the foundational pillars of the whole agreement. So this whole framework, as you said, is defined by that diplomatic tightrope.
It is. You've got the absolute rigor of international law on one side, the demand for sovereignty.
And on the other, you have the art of the possible, pragmatic compromise.
The art of negotiation, exactly. And the plan's entire purpose is to try and merge those two often opposing forces.
The reception to the plan really shows how hard that is.
Oh.
When Zelensky presented it, he framed it as a strategic win.
A military victory, even. And his reasoning was clear.
It's because the plan lets Ukraine keep a full-strength, peacetime armed forces.
Which is a huge statement of deterrence. It says, we are not being disarmed.
But Russia, of course, saw it differently.
Well, of course. They downplayed it immediately, call it just a preliminary negotiating tool. They're trying to strip it of its finality.
And we can't forget that internal pressure from Europe. That was key, wasn't it?
Absolutely critical. The sources are explicit. European leaders were worried that the first draft, the 28.1...
The one primarily shaped by a U.S. diplomat.
Exactly. They worried it gave away too much, maybe on defensive capacity or on recognizing territorial changes too quickly.
So their pushback really shaped what we have now, a more assertive, more sovereignty-focused framework.
It's a genuine multilateral effort, which is probably why it has a better chance of sticking. This brings us to the first and really the most important pillar.
Point one.
Sovereignty and non-aggression. This is the cornerstone. The entire deal is built on this. It affirms Ukraine as a fully sovereign state.
And that's not just, boilerplate language for a treaty.
Oh, not at all. It's a direct, explicit refutation of the entire narrative that drove the invasion in the first place. Any idea of diminishing Ukraine's statehood.
So the principle is crystal clear, but how do you make that real? How do you take that concept and make it enforceable after a conflict?
Well, that's where the mechanics come in. Point one mandates a legally binding non-aggression pact. But the real innovation is in the enforcement.
The eyes in the sky.
Exactly. The plan explicitly states that any violations will be monitored by satellite-based unmanned surveillance.
Which is a massive technological and strategic statement. It basically says we don't trust people on the ground to be impartial or safe.
Right. It suggests a foundational distrust of traditional monitoring. Ground-based teams from, say, the OSCE or the UN can be blocked, they can be harassed, they can be deceived.
But you can't really hide a tank column from a satellite.
Not easily. The advantages are speed and objectivity. Satellites give you verifiable near real-time data. You can use synthetic aperture radar, which sees through clouds, high-res optical imagery.
Yeah.
It's very hard to fool.
And it bypasses all the political mess of getting inspectors into a dangerous area.
It does. It also, and this is key, externalizes the security commitment. Every allied satellite flying overhead becomes this impartial, silent witness. A violation isn't just a rumor on the ground. It's a verifiable fact for the entire international community instantly.
Let's get into the weeds on that, though. What are the limits? I mean, space isn't invulnerable. The sources must address this, right? Can't Russia use counter-surveillance? Jamming.
They do address it. And yes, of course, relying on space assets creates vulnerabilities. It's expensive, for one, and processing that data requires immense intelligence infrastructure.
Which means the U.S. and key European partners are really the ones in the driver's seat.
They have to be. Now, sophisticated jamming is possible, yes, but the plan relies on a layered system. It's not just one satellite, it's multiple allied systems, different technologies. To deny access across that entire spectrum would be incredibly difficult.
And it would be a massive escalation in itself.
It would be an act of aggression that is immediately visible and would trigger sanctions. So the bet is that the cost of trying to blind the satellites is far higher than the benefit of committing a minor infraction undetected.
It's a calculated risk. Okay, so that's the foundation. Let's move to pillar 2. This is the hard power. Security and military posture.
Covered in points 2, 4, and 17, and deterrence is baked right into the deal.
Point 4 is a huge signal. Ukraine's armed forces will stay at 800,000 personnel in peacetime.
That is an enormous peacetime force. It's a deliberate signal of permanent readiness.
It's basically saying the peace will be kept by strength, not just by promises.
Peace through maximum strength. That's how the sources frame it. It does two things. One, it reassures the Ukrainian people that they're safe. Two, it tells Russia in no uncertain terms that any new aggression would be met with overwhelming force.
So it's designed to prevent the peace from being seen as just a pause, a moment of weakness.
Exactly. And then you have the other side of the security coin, which is the international guarantee in point 2.
This is where it gets complicated. We're talking about Article 5-like security assurances.
The invisible shield. But that word "like" is doing a lot of work.
It's a huge caveat. So why? Why Article 5-like and not just a formal, binding Article 5 commitment?
Right.
Why not just bring Ukraine into NATO?
Because that is the geopolitical red line. Full NATO membership right now is something neither Russia nor, frankly, several cautious NATO members are ready for. It would be a massive, immediate escalation.
So this is a political innovation, a workaround.
It's a brilliant and fragile compromise. It gives Ukraine the core benefit of collective defense, a coordinated military response, and the immediate snapback of crippling global sanctions if Russia invades again.
But it does so without triggering the automatic treaty-bound obligation that would pull all 32 NATO members directly into a hot war with Russia.
Precisely. It preserves a degree of political flexibility.
So let's play that out. What's the practical difference for, say, the U.S. or Germany? If this trigger is pulled, what happens that's different from a true Article 5?
Under a real Article 5, an attack on one is an attack on all. It's automatic. The response is not up for debate. Under this Article 5-like framework, the response is coordinated, it's robust, but the nature and the scale of the military part of that response are still sovereign decisions.
So they commit to sanctions, they commit to resupplying Ukraine, they commit to unified action, but they don't commit to, say, putting their own troops on the front line immediately.
Correct. It allows them to manage the response and mitigate the risk of a global, potentially nuclear escalation. It's a powerful deterrent, but with a built-in safety valve.
And there's a critical condition attached to this protection. It's not a blank check.
Absolutely crucial. The sources are very clear. These security guarantees are immediately void if Ukraine initiates unprovoked attacks on Russia.
Which is a stabilizing measure. It reassures the world that this is a defensive shield, not a springboard for revenge.
It has to be there. It prevents the guarantors from being dragged into a renewed conflict of Ukraine's making. And point 2 also layers the security, noting that all the existing bilateral security agreements, and there are about 30 of them, remain in force. It's a web of overlapping protections.
So this whole first part is about creating a stable foundation. What about the immediate transition, the governance needed to get from conflict to a functioning post-war state?
Right. That's covered in points 11, 13, 14, and 20. The transition has to be smooth to avoid a power vacuum.
And that starts with legitimacy at home.
Point 13. Presidential elections in Ukraine will be held promptly after the deal is ratified. It's an immediate signal that the country is returning to its normal democratic constitutional order.
But the real power, the engine of the whole peace process, is this new body, the Peace Council.
The Peace Council is everything. It's the oversight, the enforcement, the arbiter of disputes. This is the mandate of points 11 and 20. And its composition is, well, it's politically explosive.
It's chaired by the sitting U.S. president. At the time of this plan, that would be Donald Trump, along with representatives from Europe, NATO, Russia, and Ukraine.
The decision to put the U.S. president in the chair is incredibly provocative. It's a massive statement.
What are the implications of that? You're giving one country's leader, who is also the main security guarantor for one side, explicit oversight over a process that includes their main strategic rival.
Well, the sources suggest it's a calculated move. The understanding is that for this council to have real teeth, it needs the highest possible political weight behind it. Ukraine apparently demanded this, and the U.S. accepted.
So it's about making sure the decisions stick.
It ensures two things. First, immediate and comprehensive sanctions enforcement. If the council votes that there's a violation, sanctions are triggered automatically, no debate. Second, it does introduce this element of, well, potential bias.
How does that compromise the process?
Well, the arbiter of compliance is also the primary security provider for one of the combatants. You can expect Russia to constantly challenge the council's findings, arguing the chair is inherently biased.
But the counter-argument is that only the U.S. has the geopolitical muscle to actually enforce the council's decisions.
That's the argument that won the day, according to the sources. It prioritizes efficacy over a theoretical neutrality that might not actually work in practice.
Okay, so the structure's there. The big question, when does the shooting actually stop?
Immediately. Point 14 is simple. The ceasefire is effective immediately upon ratification. Every minute after the signing is a test.
And point 20 makes it clear the Peace Council isn't a temporary committee. It's here to stay.
It has to be. Long-term vigilance is the mandate. This entire first section is about building the political, security, and legal cage to contain the conflict and manage a conditional peace.
Okay, so part 1 secures the borders, the government, the very state itself. Part 2 is about securing the future. It's about the economy.
This is a critical shift. The sources really emphasize this point. Stability isn't just about soldiers and satellites. It's about prosperity and interdependence.
And it starts with a clear direction. Point 3, European destiny.
This is probably the most powerful, symbolic, and practical pillar in the entire framework. It's not just an aspiration, it's a hard-coded roadmap.
Ukraine is set to become an EU member at a predetermined date. The sources say potentially 2027 or 2028.
That timeline is incredibly aggressive. Let's be clear about that. Full EU accession can take a decade or more.
So what does a 2027 or 2028 date signal?
It signals a massive political commitment from the EU to fast-track the process. But it also puts immense pressure on Kyiv. The legal and administrative harmonization required is colossal.
All the deep reforms on judiciary, anti-corruption, the economy.
All of it. And the EU will insist those are non-negotiables.
Right.
But the plan also includes a sweetener for the short term.
Immediate preferential access to the European market.
Which is another form of an invisible shield. When Ukrainian grain, steel, and tech services are flowing freely into Europe, the economic cost of any future conflict skyrockets for everyone. It weaves Ukraine's economy into Europe so tightly that they become inseparable.
It also gives the population a tangible, immediate benefit of peace.
Exactly. It shows people in those war-torn regions that their future, their prosperity, lies with the West.
Now for the number that just jumps off the page, the economic reconstruction. Points 4 and 15 call for mobilizing $800 billion.
$800 billion. It's a number so large it's hard to conceptualize.
It's bigger than the annual GDP of nations like Switzerland or Poland. How on earth is a figure like that even calculated, and where does the money come from?
It's a comprehensive figure. It's based on estimates of replacement costs for all the destroyed infrastructure cities, power plants, bridges. But it also includes a huge amount for future-proofing the economy. It's not just about rebuilding what was lost.
It's about building something new.
Building back better, as this saying goes. The money is planned to come from a mix of sources, a big chunk from frozen Russian assets.
Which is legally and politically complicated.
Very. But it's on the table. Then you have massive loans from the World Bank and the IMF, which will be backed by Western government guarantees. And finally, a huge push for direct private sector investment from U.S. and European companies.
So where does this money actually go? The plan is specific.
Very specific. It's not just for concrete and rebar. It targets strategic sectors to create a resilient 21st century economy.
Like technology, AI, and data centers.
Right. The goal is to establish Ukraine as a decentralized, secure digital hub for all of Eastern Europe. There's also money for gas infrastructure to finally secure energy independence, and of course the massive urban reconstruction projects.
The big concern with a fund this large is always the same: corruption. How do you ensure $800 billion is used cleanly and effectively?
That is the absolute focus of the oversight mechanisms in points 4 and 15. The plan mandates the creation of a high-level prosperity administrator.
And this isn't a Ukrainian official.
No, it's a jointly appointed international figure. Think of it like a modern-day Marshall Plan coordinator. Their job is to oversee the whole recovery.
What kind of power does this administrator have?
They act as an impartial guarantor. Their mandate is to guide the spending towards strategic economic goals, not political pet projects. They'll audit the spending, they'll certify the contracts, they'll provide public reports on progress.
So they're basically the gatekeeper for the money.
They are, and their presence is what's intended to unlock the private investment. A company is much more likely to invest if they know there's a powerful, impartial administrator ensuring transparency and the rule of law.
Okay, so that's the money. Let's talk about the geopolitical alignment that goes with it. Points 5 and 19 on trade and non-proliferation.
These 2 points really solidify the economic pivot to the West. Ukraine commits to accelerating negotiations for a free trade agreement with the United States.
Which is another huge symbol. It gives them secure access to one of the world's biggest markets.
It's a counterweight. It reduces any future economic reliance on Russia or any other single regional partner. It's a declaration of economic independence.
And point 5 also addresses the nuclear question, which always hangs over this region.
Critically, Ukraine must reaffirm its status as a non-nuclear state under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT.
Why is that reaffirmation so important now?
Because after everything that's happened, there would be a huge temptation for Ukraine to pursue its own nuclear deterrent. Reaffirming its non-nuclear status is a foundational gesture of restraint. It's what makes the long-term Western security guarantees possible. It shows they're committed to defense through conventional means and alliances, not nuclear escalation.
Let's move to the energy chessboard. Points 6 and 16. Energy infrastructure became a weapon in this war. How does the plan secure it?
It focuses on the 2 most strategic and dangerous facilities, the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant and the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant.
And Ukraine's position is clear: no Russian involvement in managing them.
It's an absolute red line. These plants represent sovereign territory, essential power, and in the case of Zaporizhia, an immense potential environmental catastrophe. Their management is a matter of national survival.
So what's the solution? How do you operate a nuclear power plant on what is essentially a cold front line?
The solution in points 6 and 16 is joint operational management with the United States.
With the U.S., so American technical experts would be involved in running the plant.
That's the proposal. It would be coupled with immediate, monitored demilitarization of the entire area around the plant. U.S. involvement brings top-tier technical expertise, it brings international safety standards, and it brings immense geopolitical insulation.
It makes attacking the plant an attack on a facility with a direct American presence.
Exactly. It raises the stakes of any aggression to an almost impossibly high level.
Yeah.
It's about operational safety and geopolitical deterrence rolled into one.
And the Kakhovka Dam is also specifically mentioned for demilitarization. Why is that one so critical?
Kakhovka is vital for power, yes, but even more critically, for water.
For agriculture, for drinking water.
For vast regions of southern Ukraine, including Kherson. Its destruction or military use creates a humanitarian and ecological disaster. Clearing the military presence there isn't just about electricity. It's about allowing farming to restart, allowing people to return to their homes. It turns a military target back into a shared public utility.
So if you look at this entire second part, the message is undeniable.
Economic alignment is security. That's the thesis. The $800 billion, the EU membership track, the U.S. trade deal, the international control of energy assets, it's all designed to weave Ukraine so deeply into the Western fabric that tearing it away becomes economically and politically unthinkable.
We now have to turn to what is, without a doubt, the most politically painful part of this entire plan: the physical reality, the lines on the map.
This is where the idealism of sovereignty crashes into the brutal reality of military positions on the ground.
This is part 3, and it starts with point 8, defining the lines in the sand.
And this is the core compromise. The plan mandates that the military positions, as they stand at the moment the agreement is signed, will serve as the de facto front line.
In the four contested oblasts, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson.
Yes. And we need to analyze the enormous political risk here. By agreeing to this, Ukraine is recognizing a military status quo achieved by force as a temporary de facto reality.
Which is a very tough pill to swallow. How do the sources justify this concession? How could Zelensky ever sell this to his people?
The sources frame it as the terrible but necessary price for stopping the killing immediately. It's a temporary evil to achieve an immediate good.
The fear, of course, is that de facto and temporary have a way of becoming de jure and permanent in frozen conflicts.
That is the fundamental danger. So to mitigate that risk, the plan introduces a very interesting, very ambitious mechanism.
These potential free economic zones.
Yes. It's an attempt to use economics to blur the hard military line.
So what would that actually look like on the ground?
Think of them as internationally monitored economic buffer zones, right along the de facto front line. They would be areas where international investment is heavily incentivized, operating under special rules managed by international observers.
So the goal is to create a shared economic interest in keeping things peaceful.
Precisely. You make the local populations on both sides of the line economically dependent on stability and cross-line cooperation. If a local factory has workers and suppliers from both sides, suddenly shooting at each other becomes very bad for business.
It makes escalation too costly at the local level. And how is this fragile line monitored?
With international observers on the ground, this is separate from the satellite surveillance. Their job is to monitor the military separation zones, mediate local disputes, and verify that the free economic zones are operating as planned.
They're trying to turn a battlefield into a marketplace.
A heavily monitored marketplace, but yes, that's the idea.
Okay, from the land to the sea. Reopening the lifelines, points 9 and 12. This is about Ukraine's economic survival.
The Black Sea is everything for the Ukrainian economy. It's the highway for their grain, for their steel, for their trade. Without guaranteed freedom of the seas, any peace deal is economically unsustainable.
And these points guarantee Ukraine's unrestricted use of the Dnipro River and the Black Sea for commerce.
But a guarantee on paper isn't enough. It requires a specific military action mentioned in the plan.
The demilitarization of the Kinburn Spit. Explain why that little piece of land is so important.
The Kinburn Spit sits right at the mouth of the Dnipro River. It's a classic geopolitical choke point.
So whoever controls it can effectively blockade major Ukrainian ports like Mykolaiv and Kherson.
And can threaten the shipping lanes to Odessa. Russian forces used it to strangle Ukrainian trade. Demilitarizing it, turning it into a neutral zone, is like unblocking a critical artery. It transforms that battleground into an open commercial corridor.
For the merchants in Odessa, that single action is the difference between bankruptcy and recovery.
It is the most tangible, practical evidence in the plan of a commitment to restoring Ukraine's economic life.
Finally, in this section, we have to address the human cost. Point 10, the human element.
The plan creates a dedicated humanitarian committee, and its tasks are focused squarely on the civilians who have suffered the most.
The key tasks are incredibly sensitive. Prisoner exchanges.
The release of detained civilians, and especially children. This is a theme the narrative sources come back to again and again. And of course, organizing aid distribution and relief for war victims.
Let's just pause on the release of children and detainees. That's so much more than a policy point in a document, isn't it?
It's the moral core of the deal. Every single time a family is reunited, it's a small but powerful act of trust building. The sources describe these moments as essential for any hope of internal reconciliation.
And strategically, it gives the plan immense moral authority.
It does. It puts huge international pressure on both sides to uphold that part of the agreement. It makes the peace something that is lived, not declared, by focusing on the immediate needs of the most vulnerable people.
The logistics of this must be staggering, identifying and moving people across a hostile line, providing medical care.
It will require a massive international effort. The sources suggest this committee will be staffed by the Red Cross, UNICEF, and other major NGOs, all coordinated by the Peace Council. Their work will be the most difficult and probably the most important for making the peace feel real to ordinary people.
So we've secured the state, we've funded the economy, and we've drawn the painful lines on the map. But Part 4 of the plan deals with something much harder to fix.
The invisible wounds, the hatred, the propaganda, the deep divisions in society.
This leads us to point 7, cultural and social reforms. This feels like the longest-term project of all.
It is. This is about mending hearts and minds, which can take generations. Point 7 mandates that both countries, Ukraine and Russia, will introduce school programs promoting tolerance and understanding of each other's cultures.
So the classroom becomes a tool of diplomacy. The sources call it diplomacy in miniature.
Yeah.
How does that actually work?
Well, wartime propaganda works by dehumanizing the other side. You create an enemy. This plan tries to reverse that at the most fundamental level. Teachers and textbooks become agents of reconciliation.
So the curriculum might focus on shared history or shared cultural figures, things that bind the two cultures together.
Exactly. It's an explicit acknowledgement that you can't have a lasting peace if the next generation is being taught to hate. You have to change the national narrative itself.
And Point 7 also connects this to Ukraine's ultimate destination.
Correct. As part of its path to the EU, Ukraine commits to adopting EU rules on religious tolerance and protecting minority languages.
Which is critical for internal cohesion, especially after a divisive conflict. It sends a signal to minorities within Ukraine that they have a secure place in the post-war society.
It's an essential political signal, both for its own people and for its European partners.
Now let's move to the legal framework, Point 18. This is about ensuring the return to normal life is governed by law, not by chaos or revenge.
This is all about transitional justice. The point mandates that local officials must draft their regulations in strict accordance with the Geneva Conventions. This is to prevent score settling and protect citizens' rights in a very volatile period.
But how do you enforce that on the ground in a town that's just been liberated?
The plan calls for deploying human rights officers to patrol these towns.
International officers.
Yes, their job is to provide immediate oversight, to ensure fair treatment, to prevent vigilantism, and to make sure that accountability for any crimes is seen as impartial, not just victor's justice. They are the eyes and ears of the international community at the street level.
And Point 19 brings us back to the economy again.
It does. It's a reinforcing point, making sure that the big ideas of the U.S. Free Trade Agreement and EU market access actually translate into reality.
The sources mention merchants in Odessa and Lviv preparing for this. It's about making the peace profitable.
It's the symbolic end of economic isolation.
And finally, Point 20, which brings the whole thing full circle back to long-term oversight.
We return to the Peace Council. Its vigilance is permanent. This is the mechanism designed to ensure this isn't just a ceasefire, but a managed, sustainable peace. The sources stress that success isn't measured in weeks or months. It's measured in a generation without war.
And for that to happen, the threat of sanctions for any violation has to remain credible and immediate indefinitely.
That's the enforcement that underpins the entire structure.
So when you look at all 20 points together, it's clear this is a story of a nation trying to write its own future.
It is. A nation refusing to break, charting its own course from just surviving to actually rebuilding and renewing itself. It's breathtaking in its ambition.
We've just spent a lot of time breaking down the 20 points, the mechanics, the policy. It is incredibly detailed.
Meticulously so. But the sources we've been working from, in their conclusions, they step back from the policy and they offer a kind of philosophical warning.
A warning about the very nature of this peace.
Exactly. That it has to be genuine. It can't just be structural.
They warn against what they call temporary ceasefires and symbolic gestures. They even draw a parallel.
A very stark one. They compare it to the situation between India and Pakistan, where you have these intermittent ceasefires that just freeze the conflict. The lines on the map are quiet, but the underlying hatred, the enmity, it's all still there, ready to boil over.
And a peace like that is just inherently unstable. It's just a pause, not a resolution.
Right. So what the analysis concludes is that a real, lasting peace has to be built on a foundation of daily, visible cooperation.
Not just, a photo op of leaders shaking hands.
Exactly. It requires a real transformation on the ground. The borders have to be truly demilitarized so that ordinary people can cross safely. It requires joint economic projects that benefit communities on both sides of that de facto line.
So a former checkpoint becomes a trading post.
That's the vision. It's a peace that is actively lived by the people it affects, day in and day out.
And for that to happen, you need transparency, you need impartial observers, and you need everyone to believe that the economic incentive for peace is greater than the political incentive for conflict.
And this leads to the most profound and probably the most controversial cultural argument that the source material makes.
It goes way beyond treaties and security guarantees.
It does. They dedicate a lot of time to discussing the idea of a shared Slavic identity.
And this is where it gets really interesting. The sources state pretty directly that Russians and Ukrainians are, quote, One Slavic people, bound by centuries of intertwined history, family ties, and shared traditions.
This shared heritage is positioned in a really complex way. On the one hand, it's seen as the root of the tragedy, the horror of brother fighting brother.
But on the other hand,
It's also presented as the only possible foundation for a true, deep, lasting reconciliation. The shared language roots, the shared Orthodox faith traditions, the millions of families that are intertwined across the border.
it means the conflict is deeply, horribly personal.
But it also means the potential for repair is uniquely strong if it can be harnessed.
That presents what might be the single biggest challenge of the whole plan. How do you do both? How do you fiercely celebrate and protect Ukraine's unique, sovereign independence?
While also acknowledging and even celebrating the common cultural heritage that binds the two peoples.
It seems like a contradiction.
And that is the tightrope. The sources suggest the ultimate goal of the 20 points is to create a framework where that dual recognition is possible, to transform conflict into coexistence and fear into hope.
So it's a chance to redefine that Slavic identity, to prove that a shared heritage doesn't have to mean shared politics.
Exactly. To prove it can triumph over these toxic, politically engineered divisions. That's the difference between a military truce and real societal harmony.
So the ultimate success of the plan, the blueprint for the world that it could be, doesn't just depend on the Peace Council or the $800 billion.
It depends on this human transformation. The sources say the path forward requires practical cooperation. A farmer in Kherson trading freely with a neighbor across the line. A merchant in Odessa arranging shipments with a counterpart in a Russian port.
Celebrating shared culture instead of weaponizing it.
That's the long, difficult path to a genuine peace. Not just the absence of war, but the presence of security, prosperity, and dignity. So you take a step back and look at the whole thing. The sheer complexity and scope of this 20-point framework is just stunning. It's not a ceasefire agreement.
Not at all. It's a nation-building project on paper.
It is. It's a commitment to massive economic reform, deep cultural reconciliation, these incredibly complex security guarantees, all overseen by this powerful international body chaired by the American president.
It tries to manage every single dimension, from the Zaporizhia nuclear plant down to a textbook in a classroom.
It's an attempt at a total solution.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner? You now have a comprehensive, deeply analyzed understanding of Ukraine's blueprint for its future.
It's a story told in 20 strategic steps, an attempt to move a country from the rubble of war to the scaffolding of rebirth.
And we've seen how this plan tries to build a peace that is, as the sources say, lived, not declared. From the human rights officers in liberated towns to the international cranes rebuilding cities with that $800 billion fund.
It's a masterpiece of pragmatic and often painful diplomacy.
It balances this massive peacetime army and conditional Western guarantees against the absolute necessity of recognizing de facto front lines and demilitarizing critical infrastructure.
The whole structure relies on satellite surveillance, on the high political cost of sanctions from the Peace Council, and on the powerful lure of EU accession.
The stakes just couldn't be higher. The level of international scrutiny means every single step, every signature, every quiet day along the line is a test of this fragile, heavily monitored trust.
It's a plan designed for endurance, not just for a press conference.
And that leads us to our final provocative thought. The framework itself brings up the deep historical and cultural bonds between Russians and Ukrainians, explicitly calling them one Slavic people. So the real question for the future isn't just about the line on the map, it's this. Can a peace that is secured by sanctions, by satellites, and by massive military power ever truly last without a genuine, deep commitment from both societies to celebrate their shared cultural identity, rather than allowing their political divisions to perpetually poison their future?
The entire 20-point plan, with all its brilliant mechanics, may ultimately stand or fall on the answer to that question, on whether heritage can finally truly triumph over hostility.